Welcome to Truth in the Dark. Here, we bring you real cases based on verified and credible sources. So, no more waiting, let's dive into the story. Before we begin, I must caution you that the stories we'll discuss are quite disturbing, and they'll only become more chilling as we progress. Of the three images we're examining today, this is the one you might recognize. However, even if you haven't seen it, I'm sure you've heard about the disaster that unfolded just moments after this picture was captured, as the case is truly remarkable. It's widely recognized that we're about to delve into some lesser-known facts that are sure to astonish you. This image captures the thrill of a new journey, showcasing the crew of the STS-51L as they beam and wave to the enthusiastic crowd that gathered to witness the event. On January 28, 1986, countless individuals huddled around their televisions, eager to experience this historic moment. While the mission was standard, involving the transport of cargo and crew from Earth to orbit, it also marked the final flight of the space shuttle. As depicted in the image, the crew of the Challenger consisted of 7 members, 5 astronauts and 2 payload specialists. Among them was Krista McAuliffe, a 37-year-old who was set to make history as the first civilian and teacher in space. She was selected from over 11,000 applicants for the NASA program. Interestingly, a lesser-known fact is that Big Bird from Sesame Street was also considered for the Challenger crew. Although the idea was seriously entertained, it ultimately did not materialize. Imagine what could have happened if it had. What unfolded next would have been even more distressing for the children watching across America. Everyone boarded the Challenger, and I believe you know precisely what transpired. Almost all of us are aware of the tragic fate of the Challenger on that final flight. The crew was prepared for their mission, and Commander Francis Scobie issued the now haunting command of go. The mission appeared destined for success, particularly since the shuttle had already accomplished 9 successful missions. Seconds later, NASA received one last message from the Challenger. Pilot Michael Smith, embarking on his inaugural journey into space, simply expressed, "Oh," before all electronic communication with the shuttle vanished. Many believe the Challenger crew was oblivious to the impending danger until it was too late, yet Smith's reaction suggested otherwise. Those on the ground were powerless, watching in disbelief. One moment, the crowd erupted in cheers, exhilarated by the launch's force as the Challenger ascended. The next, silence enveloped them, a heavy pause settling in as reality dawned. Individuals began to comprehend the gravity of the situation as NASA personnel were seen with tears in their eyes. Mission Control managed to communicate that a significant malfunction had occurred just 73 seconds into the launch. The Challenger erupted into a massive fireball at approximately 48,000 feet above the Earth's surface. On the ground, all that could be seen were enormous plumes of white smoke and flames. The understanding of what transpired unfolded slowly, with the crowd gazing up into the sky, their expressions turning somber as they grasped the reality of the Challenger. As it descended, it shattered into fragments, eliciting cries and screams from the onlookers, who covered their mouths in disbelief. The question hung in the air, echoing the collective fear. Where are they? A voice broke the silence, responding with a chilling finality, "Dead. We've lost them." One of the most heart-wrenching aspects of this tragedy was that nearly all the loved ones of the crew were present on the ground, gazing upward, powerless as the shuttle disintegrated before their eyes. Particularly poignant was the sight of Krista McAuliffe's 2 children, brought to the roof to witness the launch, now faced with an unimaginable loss. In the control center, they positioned themselves for the optimal view, eager to witness their mother etch her name in history. McAuliffe had brought along her son's frog stuffed animal and her daughter's cross and chain into the shuttle, seeking a touch of good fortune. 9-year-old Scott and 6-year-old Carolyn McAuliffe would have witnessed the explosion with unsettling clarity, and they were not alone. Many children watched from the ground as their parents faced a tragic fate. The burning shuttle ascended for another 25 seconds before it ultimately fell into the Atlantic, leaving behind wreckage. Then scattered over the ocean east of Florida, to all the shocked onlookers, it appeared as though the Challenger had exploded. This has become one of the most significant misconceptions surrounding the Challenger disaster. NASA referred to it as an explosion, as did the media and many individuals in the years that followed. Even I believed it had exploded. However, it didn't technically explode. So what truly occurred? It erupted in flames and broke into pieces due to a seal in the shuttle's right solid fuel rocket booster, which was designed to prevent leaks from the tank. Weakened by the frigid temperatures, the structure failed, and hot gas began to pour through the leak, collapsing the fuel tank and ripping it apart. Then, it all burst into flames. The flood of liquid oxygen and hydrogen created a massive fireball that tore the Challenger into pieces above the heads of the horrified crowd. Another misconception is that when the Challenger erupted in flames and broke apart, everyone on board had been killed instantly. In fact, NASA had insisted that the crew died instantly, probably because the alternative was too horrific to contemplate. It is a sobering reality that, 6 months later, a report disclosed the crew cabin had remained intact as it separated from the shuttle. Contrary to popular belief, the crew of the Challenger survived the initial disintegration. In March 1986, Navy divers discovered the remnants of the crew cabin approximately 18 miles from the launch site, submerged in about 100 feet of water. Inside, the remains of the crew were found, though only some could be identified. Identified were those who were returned to their families, while others were laid to rest in a monument. However, the deaths of the Challenger crew are likely more horrifying than one might imagine. The shuttle's disintegration didn't exert a force strong enough to kill or even seriously injure the crew. Instead, most were likely still alive as they began their descent, and, astonishingly, they were probably conscious. The crew cabin was equipped with air packs that contained several minutes of air for emergencies, and 3 of the air packs were discovered in the wreckage, indicating that at least some members of the crew were conscious during the fall. The crew cabin plummeted at over 200 miles per hour, and it has been speculated that the sudden drop in pressure may have rendered the crew unconscious, preventing them from being awake during the tragic crash into the water. However, if this were the case, the mid-deck floor of the space shuttle would likely have been severely damaged by the pressure change, which it was not. Disturbingly, it appears that the crew may have been aware of their final moments. The harrowing seconds of their existence unfolded as the cabin collided with the ocean's surface roughly 2 minutes and 45 seconds after the shuttle disintegrated. They might have been aware of the unfolding tragedy during that agonizing stretch of time. Those nearly 3 minutes would have been utterly chilling. The impact with the sea was, without a doubt, fatal, and even if they had somehow managed to endure, the reality was grim. The shuttle lacked an escape hatch, rendering any chance of escape impossible. What many remain unaware of is that a crew of 7 became the first Americans to lose their lives during a space flight since NASA's inception in 1958. The most chilling aspect of this tragedy is that it was foreseen the night before the launch. 5 engineers urged NASA to postpone the mission, aware that the O-ring seals would fail in the cold conditions, and the launch was scheduled in the coldest environment for any shuttle to date. One engineer, Bob Eberling, confided to his wife that he feared the Challenger would explode, a haunting prediction that proved tragically accurate. To this day, Eberling carries the weight of blame for the disaster, and believes he could have done more to ensure people paid attention to him. Yet in the end, it wasn't his choice for the Challenger to launch that day. A significant misunderstanding surrounding the Challenger disaster is the notion that a shocked audience of millions witnessed the event unfold live, but this was far from the truth. The launch occurred at 11:39 a.m. It was a Tuesday, a time when many were occupied with work, not gathered around their televisions to witness the historic launch. All the major networks cut away from the footage the instant the shuttle disintegrated, aiming to protect viewers from the traumatic scene. Consequently, far fewer people witnessed the moment live than is commonly believed. Instead, most encountered the shocking replays of the tragedy hours later. Yet, amidst this reality, a chilling twist emerged. NASA had intended to share this significant event with schools, arranging satellite broadcasts for that purpose. Television sets and classrooms played a significant role in this event, largely due to the involvement of McAuliffe, a teacher. Although many did not witness the Challenger disaster unfold live, hundreds of schoolchildren experienced it firsthand. One teacher, reflecting on the moment she shared the live feed with her students on a small television, recounted how silence fell over the room immediately after the explosion. The children, bewildered by what they had just witnessed, began to ask a haunting question. Were all those people on the shuttle dead? She found herself in the difficult position of having to answer them. Indeed, even now, numerous individuals who witnessed the catastrophe during their school days remain deeply unsettled by the images etched in their minds. In attempts to rationalize the tragedy, many have highlighted the immense pressure that NASA faced to fulfill the Challenger's mission. This assertion holds weight, as there had been numerous delays, and the agency was eager to compensate for the challenges encountered while attempting to safely return the Columbia after an investigation. Ultimately, it was determined that NASA had intentionally breached launch protocols, fully aware of the dangerously low temperatures. The O-ring seal's propensity to fail in low temperatures raised concerns, yet there was also apprehension regarding the fuel. Despite these issues, the decision was made to proceed with the launch, which knowingly breached established protocols. Some speculations even suggested that the blame could be directed at the White House under Ronald Reagan, as it was believed he pressured for the shuttle to launch in alignment with his State of the Union address, aiming to project a successful space program. However, there is no substantial evidence to support claims of direct involvement. There was a significant amount of pressure exerted on them to expedite the launch, ultimately pushing them to proceed before they were adequately prepared. Notably, Reagan postponed his State of the Union address for the first time in history to address the Challenger disaster. He also established a commission to investigate the causes of the tragedy, appointing Neil Armstrong as vice chairman and including Sally Ride, the first American woman in space, to assist with the inquiry. An interesting detail about the Challenger is that 2 pieces, a decade after the recovery of all significant components, remnants of the shuttle were discovered. The wreckage that was salvaged lay buried in an abandoned Minuteman missile silo near Cape Canaveral Air Station. However, approximately half of the spacecraft remained submerged in the Atlantic Ocean, as the cost and complexity of retrieval were prohibitive. There lingered a possibility that fragments might eventually wash ashore, which indeed occurred in 1996. 20 miles south of the Kennedy Space Center, on Cocoa Beach, 2 barnacle-encrusted pieces of the shuttle were uncovered. A figure strolled along the sandy shore, while NASA engineers uncovered that the larger fragment originated from the left inboard wing flap of the Challenger, a crucial component for steering the orbiter during its entry and landing. The second piece likely broke off from the larger one, a revelation that caught many off guard, as it was widely believed that no shuttle parts would travel more than a dozen miles from the sea to the shore. The Challenger disaster ultimately halted all plans for civilian space travel for 2 decades, which honestly was likely for the best, because I doubt I would have been eager to board a shuttle after witnessing 7 people perish in such a tragic manner. One final lesser-known detail is that crew member Ellison Onizuka brought his daughter's soccer ball with him on the mission, and even though he didn't survive, the ball was remarkably recovered from the Challenger wreckage unharmed. It was placed in a memorial for Onizuka until 3 decades later when another astronaut took the ball to the International Space Station. It seemed appropriate to complete the narrative with our second image today, one that could easily appear on any social media platform, amplifying the unsettling nature of its backstory. The Ruby family from Duncan, Oklahoma, was deeply rooted in journalism. John and his wife, Joy Tinker, collaborated at the Marlowe Review, where John held the position of publisher. They had 2 children, Catherine and Alan. In 2014, Catherine was 17, while 19-year-old Alan was enrolled at the University of Oklahoma. The family appeared ordinary and typical, much like many others. My family and yours, not the kind you would ever suspect could face tragedy, yet it unfolded on October 13, 2014. The Ruby's longtime housekeeper, Rosemary Chavez, arrived at their home around 8:30 a.m. and was met with an unsettling silence. Unbeknownst to her, John's coworkers had already begun to feel concerned, as he had uncharacteristically failed to show up for work on Friday and missed the weekly high school football game he never missed. These were subtle signs that something dark had transpired, but no one could have anticipated the truth. One truly suspected nothing as she meticulously navigated through the house. The housekeeper observed that all the cabinets stood ajar and the dog's food bowls brimmed with excess. Upon entering the kitchen, she spotted a pair of feet, Catherine's and then John, lying face down in the doorway. Further inside, she discovered Tinker, cold and unresponsive. The sight of the three, all shot to death, left her utterly distraught. Overwhelmed by the tragedy that had befallen the family she cherished, she made a harrowing call to 911. The police arrived swiftly. On the scene, authorities cordoned off the house while the Rubies' neighbors poured into the street, eager to understand the unfolding situation. Many were particularly distressed to discover that it was the Rubies who had lost their lives, as they were well regarded in the community for their kindness and neighborly spirit. As news of the tragic deaths of the three Rubies circulated, so too did the unsettling rumor that they might have been victims of a robbery gone horribly wrong. The police suspected that the crime scene may have been manipulated to resemble a robbery, a notion that sent chills through the community. The entire community was filled with anxiety, pondering who might be next. This theory would ultimately prove to be entirely misguided, though no one was aware of that at the time. They were also oblivious to the astonishing twists and turns this case would soon unveil. One of the most peculiar coincidences, particularly given its sheer randomness, was that Alan Ruby was apprehended just hours after his family was discovered deceased. However, the charge against him had no connection to his family. Back in January, Alan had already entered a guilty plea for credit card theft. After taking his grandmother's credit card, he found himself in a delayed sentencing program and on probation. As part of this arrangement, he faced a fine of $1,500, was required to pay $5,980 in restitution, and had to complete a cognitive behavior program intended to address his actions. However, as we delve deeper, it becomes clear that the situation is more intricate than simply him misusing his grandmother's credit card. He opened a credit card in his grandmother's name, which goes beyond mere theft. It's outright fraud. Additionally, he faced charges for possessing stolen checks and related offenses. At this juncture, local authorities were probing into his activities concerning forged checks totaling approximately $17,500 since August. He received a 3-year prison sentence for the fraud charge, but this was merely the start. On October 9th, just 4 days before his death, he discovered that his 9mm semi-automatic handgun was missing as he was heading to work. He had kept it in the console of his vehicle, a truck, and he promptly informed the police, mentioning he believed it had been stolen that very morning. He was unaware, of course, that it was his son Alan who had taken the gun from his truck. Alan was fully aware of his intentions with the weapon. The same day John realized his gun was missing, Alan arrived at the house around 8 p.m. He confronted his mother in the kitchen and shot her directly in the neck. Miraculously, the bullet did not prove fatal, though she collapsed to the ground, witnessing the horror unfold. That his mother was still alive, Alan raised the gun again and shot her a second time, this time aiming at her head to ensure the bullet would kill her. Catherine was outside washing her car at the time, but she came rushing into the house through the front door and then into the kitchen. Had she heard gunshots? Did she see her mother lying on the ground? I don't know for sure, and we won't know because Alan shot her in the head, immediately killing her. I found this next detail really disturbing to imagine, because after killing his mother, Alan and his sister remained in the house, their bodies tense with anticipation for their father's return. What struck me as particularly unsettling was the premeditated nature of the crime. It's often easier to envision acts of violence as impulsive reactions, but Alan had meticulously orchestrated his family's demise. He had stolen the gun and then waited, almost an hour, for his father to arrive, ready to execute his plan. When John finally entered, Alan acted swiftly, shooting him in a manner reminiscent of how he had taken his mother's life, starting with a single shot. In the aftermath, he felt the weight of the moment as he hit the ground, the silence settling in after the chaos. Alan lingered at the scene, methodically retrieving the DVD from the security system before making his exit. He took care to dispose of the evidence, casting both the DVD and the gun into the depths of a lake. On his drive back to the dorm, he retrieved his cell phone, intentionally left behind to create an alibi, ensuring it wouldn't connect him to the tragic events that had unfolded. Towers near the Ruby home add an intriguing layer to the narrative. He made a post on social media, claiming he was at his dorm that night. Alan had clearly orchestrated his actions, considering nearly every detail as if nothing had transpired. Following this, he departed from Oklahoma not to escape, as one might think, but to attend a University of Oklahoma versus Texas game in Dallas. There, He enjoyed the luxury of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel and celebrated the entire weekend, even sharing a picture with friends from the hotel. The girl smiled, blissfully unaware of the devastation Alan had unleashed upon his family. Instead of attending the game, he chose to spend his time at the bars. His friends later recounted that he appeared joyful, laughing, and enjoying himself throughout the weekend, giving no indication of any inner turmoil. This suggests that Alan was not grappling with guilt after the tragedy. Rather, he exuded a troubling confidence that he would evade capture. But how did the police ultimately apprehend him? Initially, the investigation into the Ruby family deaths prompted the police to invite Alan to the house for assistance. Upon hearing the tragic news of his family's demise, he appeared genuinely distressed. However, once at the scene, the officers noted his peculiar behavior, describing him as cold and callous despite the recent loss of his parents and sister. He reportedly refrained from asking many questions about the incident and maintained a surprisingly nonchalant demeanor throughout, leading to heightened suspicions among the investigators. Him in for an interview shortly after his arrest on the fraud charge. During this time, Alan quickly admitted to stealing his father's gun and murdering his family, just a day after their bodies were discovered. It was no surprise when Alan faced 3 counts of first-degree murder. He recounted the same narrative I just shared. He shot his mother, sister, and father before disposing of the gun and DVD from the surveillance system in a lake to eliminate the evidence. However, only a portion of that account was accurate. You see, Alan had. It is evident that this crime was meticulously planned, with considerable thought put into the execution. When he informed the police about disposing of the gun and DVD, it was a blatant falsehood. That was not his actual course of action. One might wonder why he chose to lie. Perhaps he believed that by fabricating a story, he could keep the incriminating evidence concealed. Maybe he thought that if the evidence remained undiscovered, he could secure a lighter sentence. Or perhaps he was under the impression that they wouldn't be able to establish a connection at all. Regardless of his reasoning, his strategy ultimately failed. Alan likely underestimated the police's ability to locate the storage unit, but they succeeded in doing so. Surveillance captured him driving to the storage buildings shortly after his family was shot inside their unit. The police discovered the missing 9mm gun, believed to be the weapon used in the shooting, along with the surveillance tape from Ruby's home. They also found blue nitrile gloves, which they suspect he wore during the crime. Additionally, a number of items taken from his family's house were recovered, including his mother's purse, checks, deposit slips, credit cards, 2 computers, an iPad mini, and a box. On his way to Dallas, Alan, filled with prescription medication, attempted to dispose of the clothing he wore during the tragic shooting of his family, casting the evidence aside on the roadside. But the question lingers: why did he do it? This is a thought that continually occupies my mind, particularly when considering the actions of a 19-year-old killer. What could drive someone to take the lives of their own family in such a cold-blooded manner? It seems that Alan often indulged in extravagant spending sprees, relishing the opportunity to flaunt his wealth to his university peers, taking pleasure in the perception of affluence he projected. People were captivated by him, largely due to the Rolex watch and Louis Vuitton shoes he flaunted. Alan even went to the extent of tagging his social media posts with #expensive. When his parents funded a trip to Paris for him, he ended up spending over $5,000. Concerned, his parents reported the situation to the police, suspecting he was using a credit card that wasn't his. This marked the start of the stolen credit card charge. As it turned out, he was using his grandmother's card. Eventually, it was thought that he had either taken one of his mother's credit cards or opened an account in her name without consent. The funds he squandered were not his own, but belonged to his family. This wasn't the first time. 2 years prior, a severe dispute over finances had escalated to the point where he allegedly assaulted her. At their wits' end, his parents concluded that he needed to be entirely severed from financial access due to his reckless behavior. It's evident that an individual who took pleasure in showcasing wealth to the extent of mocking those who consumed ramen noodles would be distressed by the loss of their capacity to spend extravagantly. However, it wasn't solely his frustration over being financially restricted that drove Alan to commit such a heinous act. Reports indicate that he informed the authorities of a debt amounting to $3,000 owed to a loan shark. He believed that if his family were to perish, he would stand to inherit their money, which he thought would not only alleviate his financial obligations, but also provide a way out of his predicament. He possessed all the funds he desired to use, free from anyone's objections. His father held 2 life insurance policies totaling $20,000, intended for his wife upon his death, and subsequently divided between the siblings if both parents passed. Was this the amount that Alan had taken a life for? During the court proceedings for the triple homicide, Alan appeared as a timid, frightened youth. His voice was often so soft that it was difficult to catch his words, and he trembled visibly, traits that starkly contrasted with the image I had envisioned. An individual whose rage over financial matters led to the tragic loss of their parents and sister often displayed tears in front of investigators and the judge, yet the prosecutor dismissed these emotions as insincere, claiming the only regret expressed was for the end of his own life as he knew it. This notion was further supported by his failure to offer any apologies for the heinous acts committed in court. He did, however, acknowledge his compulsive shopping habits, which seemed like a significant understatement. Part of the testimony provided was from the housekeeper Chavez, who discovered the bodies of the Rubis, provided a tearful account of the harrowing find. However, she also shared a compelling detail. A month prior to the tragedy, Alan's teenage sister, Catherine, was in tears over his return to troubling behavior, likely linked to his spending habits. Chavez attempted to console her, but Catherine expressed her fears, revealing that she had heard Alan making alarming statements to his friends, including threats about potentially harming them. It's quite challenging to offer solace to someone during such a difficult trial. The insurance company has even petitioned the judge to determine that Alan isn't entitled to the policy funds, which seems reasonable. As of now, there hasn't been any public disclosure regarding whether the judge has ruled against Alan receiving the insurance money. However, it appears unlikely that he would be granted access to those funds, particularly if he's convicted of murder. There's something deeply unsettling about this entire case. The fact that Alan had taken the lives of his family is undeniably unsettling, yet there's an additional layer to his actions that deserves attention. It traces back to the fraud charge from January. Alan was aware of the impending fraud charge related to opening a credit card in his grandmother's name. While he may not have known the exact consequences he would face, having pled guilty meant he must have anticipated some jail time. He had a few months of freedom before the sentencing, but he anticipated the inevitable. Yet just before uttering a word, he resolved to eliminate his entire family to claim their fortune. But deep down, he had to understand that prison awaited him soon. What was the rationale behind his actions? Did he genuinely believe he could escape the consequences of his fraud and freely spend his family's wealth? Had he become so consumed by the fear of being disowned that he overlooked the futility of his plan? The reality was that he would be incarcerated for several years, rendering his murderous intentions almost meaningless. The question lingers: did he act out of desperation for money, or was there a darker motive behind his actions? It seems illogical that he would choose to harm his family instead of waiting for the fraud charges to clear. Alan's eventual life sentence without parole feels almost poetic for someone so consumed by greed. Strangely, he appears to acknowledge this himself. In a letter from prison, he expresses a belief that he deserves the death penalty for his horrific crime, claiming his remorse is sincere. He even mentions that the tears have all. It's been a profound experience. I lost my entire family in one moment. How could they not be real? He never faced the death penalty, having taken a plea deal that included no parole and an agreement not to appeal. Part of this letter leaves me questioning. Alan simply states he didn't feel like himself that day, the day he took his family's lives. I wish he had elaborated on what he meant, but I fear we may never understand. One aspect of this case that intrigued me was that part of the plea deal included an agreement that Alan wouldn't be unable to gain any profit from his actions. He is barred from speaking to the media and prohibited from creating any books or films about his crimes. This, in my view, represents a form of true justice that aligns with his motivations rooted in greed, ensuring he will never bask in the spotlight or reap financial rewards for his past deeds. Before we delve into the final image, I must caution you that the narrative surrounding it is deeply unsettling, and it stands out as the most haunting of all. In 2016, two Russian girls, 17-year-old Alina Orlova and her friend Uliana Savchenko, became part of this tragic story. Students residing in Khabarovsk, a city in southeastern Russia, began taking in unwanted animals during the summer. Around this same period, reports emerged of stray dogs vanishing, leading to speculation about a possible connection between the two occurrences. Regardless of the truth, the timing is certainly intriguing. The two young girls committed to caring for the animals they rescued, capturing a series of photographs together. One particular image features an adorable puppy snugly wrapped in a pink flowery blanket, with Alina holding the dog close to her mouth. She's pulling a playful expression, pretending to take a bite out of it. Another image features a slightly older dog, accompanied by one of the girls forming a half-heart over the pup. It's the sort of endearing gesture that reflects genuine affection for the animal, making it all the more poignant. Aliana and Alina frequently delighted in dressing up with horror movie-inspired makeup, as this picture illustrates. They enjoyed crafting eerie appearances using bold black and red eyeliner, striking lipstick, and unsettling contact lenses, but eventually, they chose to transform their fascination with horror films into a chilling reality. The duo captured videos and images of themselves succumbing to their dark urges, one particularly disturbing shot featuring them grinning while holding a nail and hammer. They continued to document their actions as they harmed some of the very dogs they had once adopted and vowed to protect. I won't delve into the specifics of their actions, as it would surely unsettle you and might even lead you to want to throw your computer out of frustration. I'm eager to learn more about this narrative, yet there's a particularly unsettling image of the same dog in the half-hard hand photo that seems to echo a crucifixion. Some other images depict animals post-mortem, and one of the concluding pictures features a girl in a bloody apron, her hands stained, clearly having just completed a deeply troubling act. It was later disclosed that this individual was Elena. Although her face isn't visible in the image, a distinctive arm provides a clue. The tattoo associated with Alina would later prove to be significant. The most shocking aspect of the crime was that Alina and Oleana took a series of deeply unsettling pictures and videos, sharing them publicly online for all to witness. It appears both girls were involved in a social media platform where members shared images of animals post-mortem. Those outside this disturbing community were understandably appalled by what they encountered, drawing the attention of local residents living near the girls. Neighbors, taken aback, swiftly initiated a petition to local authorities urging action against the girls, particularly after another alarming social media post surfaced detailing their intentions to harm animals. Reports indicated that Alina, fearing the repercussions of her disturbing videos, attempted to escape her hometown to avoid arrest. Fortunately, her plans were thwarted, and she was apprehended at the Vladivostok airport just moments before she could board her flight. A connecting flight to St. Petersburg led to her being placed under house arrest until her court case. I was taken aback to discover that just prior to her arrest, Alina had expressed intentions of killing her own mother, making her arrest seem timely to prevent another tragedy. She even went so far as to inquire online about the potential prison time she would face if apprehended after committing the act, sharing graphic evidence of their crime. Yet, that was precisely what Alina attempted to deny. Initially, despite being photographed with the dogs prior to their deaths and even holding a hammer, she insisted on her non-involvement. She took to social media to assert her innocence, stating, "I would like to speak in my defense. I do not know who has put this stuff on the internet. It is not the first time somebody has tried to frame me, but I did not kill anyone and do not intend to kill." Furthermore, she alleged that all her social media accounts had been hacked, which explained the posting of the pictures. The images were fabricated, and as news of this shocking case circulated, people expressed their outrage with comments suggesting that the perpetrators should face similar treatment to that which they inflicted on the animals. Others questioned how their mothers could defend such actions, with some stating they would have reported their own child for such horrific behavior. Initially, when the case was filed in 2016, it appeared to be quite straightforward. However, as it progressed to court a few years later, the situation grew increasingly complex, leading to intriguing developments, particularly regarding allegations involving Oyana. When Savchenko was first taken into custody, she reportedly called herself the Devil's Duchess. This unusual moniker was linked to a particularly disturbing image she shared online, which depicted Oleana holding the heart of a freshly killed puppy. The caption read, "It's for you, Anubis," alluding to the Egyptian god of the dead. This image was just one among many shocking posts she made, including others showcasing her attire. With blood splattered across her clothes, Oleana reportedly explained to investigators that her attire was drenched in blood because she required that constant coverage to feel warmth. Quite peculiar, isn't it? Observing how she publicly shared their crime, coupled with such bizarre assertions, led me to ponder whether their actions were intended to be as shocking as possible, aiming to attract as much attention as they could. There seems to be no other rationale for these crimes, no motive that truly adds up. There exists a level of cruelty that eludes my comprehension. The activist posits that the photographs might have been intended for sale, suggesting an alternative motive. However, it's plausible that there were several motivations at play. Perhaps the girls committed this dreadful act for financial gain and the pursuit of fame. The activist presented this theory to the police for further investigation, though she remains uncertain about the extent of their inquiry. From my research, it appears that this may have remained mere speculation. Regardless, it was a theory that, as their crimes received increasing media attention, speculation arose that they were not merely two disturbed teenagers, but rather members of a satanic cult. This theory gained traction following Eliana's assertion that at least one of the dog's deaths was a sacrifice to an Egyptian deity. Her choice of attire, featuring what appeared to be a satanic symbol, further fueled the rumors. While the girls faced charges for the killing and harming of numerous cats and dogs, they were also implicated in a separate, unrelated case. Crime entirely, they were both charged with a separate allegation of armed robbery over an incident that involved an alleged attack on a woman with a bat and a pneumatic gun. Part of the evidence was video footage which shows Oleana bullying homeless people. Oleana was given the additional charge of insulting religious believers and inciting hatred, probably for her comments about sacrificing to an Egyptian god. In court, she was often referred to as the ringleader of the group. Something that really struck me was how, in court, Oleana always had a smile or a smirk played on her lips, leading me to believe she felt no remorse and was dismissive of the trial's gravity. Meanwhile, her nation was deeply engaged, with the investigative committee renowned in Russia for tackling the most serious cases taking charge of the investigation, underscoring the crime's severity. The outrage from her community resonated nationwide, sparking protests that might explain the heightened attention to the case. Investigated by a high-level committee, another piece of evidence emerged: the discovery of what was termed a pet cemetery, concealed within one of the abandoned buildings, likely an old hospital in their hometown. Additionally, the skull of a cat was found at one of the girls' houses, and both their computers and phones were seized as evidence. The volume of evidence is quite substantial. In that same conversation, Oleana described herself as a psychopath with a penchant for torture, ultimately pleading guilty to all charges. The crimes led to a sentence of 4 years and 3 months in a penal colony, a common type of prison in Russia, often located in remote areas and requiring some form of compulsory work. However, these facilities differ significantly from the deadly forced labor of the notorious gulags. In contrast, Elena Orlova, who also pleaded guilty, received a sentence of 3 years and 10 days in prison, breaking down in tears upon hearing the verdict. This case presents a perplexing scenario where the motive remains utterly baffling. There appears to be no tangible benefit from such cruel and senseless acts.